The nation has forfeited stewardship of its most consequential asset, not petroleum reserves, not technological supremacy, not even Marshall capacity water. And the nation that comprehends this reality with crystalline clarity is Canada. What I shall demonstrate is why the unfolding predicament across the American Southwest constitutes the most profound geopolitical realignment of our century. For the circumstances now visible at Lake Mead, along the Colorado River Basin, and throughout millions of communities represent far more than ecological deterioration. They represent a fundamental redistribution of power. Before dismissing this as mere environmental commentary, consider what the evidence reveals. 3 inflection points delivered us to this juncture. The first occurred in 2024, largely unnoticed. The second proceeds at present within Southwestern courtrooms. The third, however, fundamentally alters the bilateral relationship between America and its northern neighbor. Consider Lake Mead, the Republic's largest reservoir, now diminished to depths unseen since its impoundment during the 1,930 seconds. Those stark limestone bands ascending the canyon walls articulate what no elected official wishes to concede. Each exposed stratum represents not merely vanished water, but forfeited electrical generation, diminished agricultural output, and abandoned assumptions regarding American abundance. This reservoir, once containing sufficient volume to submerge Pennsylvania beneath 12 inches of water, now labors to sustain Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Southern California. The Colorado River, which sculpted the Grand Canyon across geological epochs, faces exhaustion by 40 million inhabitants within a single century. Yet here is what merits genuine alarm. This transcends cyclical drought. We confront a permanent reconfiguration of hydrological patterns throughout the American West. And unlike petroleum, which global markets can supply, water obeys geography. Either the resource exists within your borders or it does not. The previous century belonged to oil. Nations waged wars for its control. Alliances crystallized around its distribution. Water, however, commands more elemental significance than oil. Civilization endures without petroleum. It cannot endure without water. Here the narrative acquires unexpected dimension. As America observes its reservoirs contracting, Canada presides over 20% of planetary freshwater reserves. The Great Lakes Basin alone contains volume sufficient to submerge the continental United States beneath 10 feet of water. For the first time in North American experience, that geographical endowment becomes strategic advantage. Our story commences in 1922 with the Colorado River Compact. 7 states convened to apportion the river's flow. Their calculations derive from measurements recorded during exceptionally wet years in the river's documented history. They presume perpetual abundance. They erred catastrophically. For a century, that compact governed water entitlements throughout the Southwest. Urban centers expanded, agricultural operations proliferated, and all parties assumed continued flow because legal instruments declared it so. Rivers, however, disregard compacts. And for 2 decades, the Colorado has transmitted an unmistakable message. The water you allocated no longer exists. When hydrologists reference dead pool status for Lake Mead, they employ technical precision, not rhetorical excess. Dead pool describes conditions where water levels descend below operational outlets. No municipal supply, no hydroelectric generation, no agricultural irrigation. Consider 3 portraits, 3 lives, shaped by a crisis most Americans have yet to comprehend. First, Maria, a 3rd-generation Arizona farmer. Her family has cultivated identical acreage since 1960. Last year, her water allocation suffered a 40% reduction. This year brought further reductions. She confronts neither climatic volatility nor governmental edict. She confronts arithmetic. Insufficient supply exists to satisfy demand, and loss must fall upon someone. Second, consider James, employed in Las Vegas gaming establishments. 3 decades of residency have witnessed the city's transformation from desert settlement to metropolitan region of 2.5 million souls. Daily he passes Lake Mead. Daily he observes the receding shoreline. His livelihood depends upon visitors drawn to the improbability of a city defying geographic logic. Eventually, however, Spectacle erected upon illusion confronts actuality. Third, meet Robert, a Colorado River guide navigating these waters since 1985. He has observed rapids vanish as levels declined. He has watched sandbars emerge where deep channels once flowed. Recently, he has begun to wonder whether he narrates the river's elegy. Three individuals, three existences, unified by crisis. Yet none fully comprehends this truth. Their prospects are no longer determined in state capitals or even Washington. Their destinies are being shaped by deliberations in Ottawa. Canada did not aspire to hydrological dominance. Geography simply endowed them with advantage. While America depleted its rivers to irrigate arid lands and supply recreational pools in the nation's driest precincts, Canada safeguarded its watersheds. While American officials presumed inexhaustible supply, Canadian policymakers recognized water as strategic patrimony requiring preservation. Now, for the first time, that stewardship translates into geopolitical leverage. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, previously a modest environmental protection instrument, has acquired far greater significance. It declares Canada's unwillingness to export its aquatic abundance to remedy American scarcity. Consider the implications. For 8 decades, America presumed perpetual negotiating capacity, confident it could broker arrangements, apply economic influence to secure necessary resources. Water, however, restructures that calculus. Canada requires no American consent. They possess what America needs, and America commands no equivalent exchange. This represents the institutional recalibration I have consistently forecast. When great powers exhibit volatility, smaller stable nations accrue influence not through martial conquest, not through economic coercion, but through subtler means. They become indispensable through dependability. Picture a conference room in Phoenix. Water administrators from 7 states, tribal delegates, federal representatives. They examine projections everyone recognizes as generous. Even under optimistic scenarios, the Colorado River system cannot fulfill obligations encoded in existing compacts. One voice proposes purchasing agricultural allotments, another suggests desalination infrastructure, a third mentions Canada. Silence descends. For everyone understands that conversation leads somewhere. American negotiators have rarely ventured in living memory, soliciting assistance from disadvantage rather than proposing arrangements from strength. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, Canadian water policy specialists conduct markedly different deliberations. They are not contemplating how to assist America. They are determining how to ensure Canadian water remains Canadian patrimony. They are constructing frameworks, treating water not as tradable commodity but as sovereign resource demanding protection. And here stands the element that should concern every American policymaker. Canada pursues this course not from antagonism but from foresight. They observed America's hydrological crisis develop. They examined the projections and reached an inevitable conclusion. Permitting water exports now would foreclose any possibility of restricting them later. A decade hence, historians will identify 2024 and 2025 as the years when water diplomacy superseded petroleum diplomacy as the central characteristic of North American relations. 2 decades forward, Canadian defense enterprises will be embedded so thoroughly within European supply networks that disentanglement becomes inconceivable. Yet presently, in 2025, most Americans still regard water as a utility emerging from household fixtures. They have not yet grasped that those fixtures connect to systems experiencing critical strain, to reservoirs approaching depletion, to rivers no longer completing their journey to the ocean. Consider now the third inflection point. The transformation I indicated would restructure everything. The United States Supreme Court presently deliberates a case determining whether states can enforce water entitlements drafted a century past, or whether those instruments require renegotiation reflecting contemporary conditions. The decision, anticipated in 2025, will either bind America to a regime designed for a wetter climate or mandate comprehensive reconsideration of water allocation throughout the West. Yet here stands the genuine pivot. Whatever the court determines, it cannot conjure additional supply. It can merely adjudicate who forfeits access to water no longer available in promised volumes. That determination will establish which states flourish, which struggle, and which commence the agonizing process of demographic contraction. This transcends hydrology. It concerns the American conviction that sufficient technology, sufficient capital, or sufficient political resolve can solve any predicament. Water instructs us differently. Certain problems admit no solution. They permit only adaptation. As Lake Mead diminishes, attention shifts toward the Great Lakes. As the Colorado withers, pressure intensifies to exploit the Mississippi. And as American requirements grow more acute, the temptation to characterize Canadian water as continental resource rather than national patrimony will strengthen. Canada, however, no longer plays the acquiescent neighbor. They witnessed America's trade commitments evaporate amid predictability concerns. They absorbed lessons from USMCA intimidation. Now they apply those lessons to water governance, constructing legal architecture that establishes unambiguous position. Canadian water remains Canadian. American officials will find this disorienting. For generations, we have operated upon the premise that American necessity translates into American acquisition. Water, however, differs from petroleum. Alternative sources cannot be developed elsewhere. Laboratory synthesis remains impossible. Either the resource exists within your territory or it does not. Farmers forfeiting water entitlements lose more than revenue streams. They surrender generational holdings that defined familial identity. Cities facing contraction lose more than inhabitants. They forfeit tax revenue, political influence, and the mythology of perpetual expansion. Workers compelled to relocate are not merely changing employment. They become climate-displaced persons within their own republic. This constitutes America's choice: persist in treating water as inexhaustible and observe reality, impose brutal corrections through emergency, or acknowledge scarcity presently and undertake the arduous work of adjustment while options remain available. Canada did not elect to become a hydrological power geography elected for them, yet they chose to safeguard what geography bestowed. That choice now transforms the balance of authority across North America in ways no trade compact or military confederation can reverse. For ultimately, one can function without technological sophistication. One can endure without material abundance. One can persist without influence. But one cannot exist without water. The nation commanding water during an epoch of scarcity commands something more elemental than any resource in recorded civilization. This represents not the world within which I matured, but the world we now inhabit. Without adaptation, we shall spend the coming generation observing communities constructed upon plenty learning to subsist upon insufficiency. As America's relationship with Canada transforms from partnership to dependence, the bathtub ring ascending Lake Mead's canyon walls marks more than vanished water. It marks vanished certainty. Within that loss resides the 21st century's most consequential instruction. Dependability matters more than might, sustainability matters more than expansion, and nations comprehending this truth will determine the future. If this analysis merits consideration, share it with those who must understand what truly stands at hazard. For the water conflicts are not approaching, they are present. They proceed within courtrooms and policy chambers rather than upon battlefields. Make no mistake, however, this constitutes a struggle for survival. The outcome will establish which communities endure 50 years hence and which become marginal entries in histories documenting civilizations that expanded beyond sustainable limits. Until we meet again, observe the rivers. They articulate truths that political convenience prefers to disregard.